You don't have to wait until you're successful to start to heal yourself. And once you live in the present, days go by slowly. And I describe myself in the Love Conquers Fear book, as you know, as a successful sleepwalker up until around the time of age 50. And that was a hard thing for me to write in my book.
But what types of things do you struggle with personally?
Well, I'm in the world of form just like you. And in the world of form, we're programmed to be in a constant comparison machine. And so that comparison machine is always trying to get us to crave a bunch of things that we don't need. And the only way you find happiness is by searching inside, by having some inner communion. What mattered the most that whole time was the journey, that the journey was the reward. The first book I ever wrote is Entrepreneur's Essentials, and there's a chapter in that on capture the amazing journey through photographs, because that's what you'll remember the most.
Welcome to Unlocking Moves, where we want to cover those key pivotal moments and decision points that really change the lives of successful entrepreneurs and leaders. And I want to hear their stories, not just their glory stories, though, Brett Hurt. I want to hear your gory stories, because as I like to say, the bigger the shit show, the bigger the lesson. We've got a great episode for you today because I've got my YPO friend, Brett Hurt, on the pod. He's founded 6 companies, 3 of them bootstrapped, exited all of them successful. So he's got a great story to tell. But now he's on to his life's work. Love Conquers Fear. It's a book. It's a podcast. It's a holding company. It's really a way of life. And so I'm excited to get into that. But Brett, before we get into any of that, as you know, I like to hit my guests up with an off-the-wall question or comment to really keep them on their toes, keep my audience on their toes. You ready?
Right. Yeah, I'm ready.
Perfect.
Let's do it.
All right, here we go. So you've written a book called Love Conquers Fear. Mm-hmm. So here's my question. What are you afraid of?
The biggest thing I'm afraid of is whether or not humanity will meet this moment to create heaven on earth. If we'll succumb to fear, then we create a dystopia we can't imagine. If we manifest love within ourselves, we'll create a heaven on earth that we can't imagine today. So my biggest fear is whether or not we choose well, but I'm 95% certain that we do. But that is what keeps me up at night.
Wow. As you can tell, we're going to get deep today on some very meaty topics, big philosophical topics. But what types of things do you struggle with personally?
Well, I'm in the world of form just like you. And in the world of form, we're programmed to be in a constant comparison machine. And so that comparison machine is always trying to get us to crave a bunch of things that we don't need. And the only way you find happiness is by searching inside, by having some inner communion. You know, in Christianity, I'm Jewish, as you know, but in Christianity, the mantra, if you will, is the kingdom of God is found within. But that's true in all the spiritual traditions. It's all about this exploration of the soul and us ultimately manifesting love in ourselves so that we can be of service to both ourselves and to others. And so I am constantly bombarded with the same bullshit you're bombarded with, you know, with a bunch of ads telling us to eat foods that are going to make us sick, a bunch of pharmaceutical products that some of which are great and that we need, like antibiotics, and some of which are absolutely horrible for us, like opioids, a bunch of constant dystopia pushed to us by the media, which is not a critique on the free press. It's a critique on the business model. It's easier for me to hijack your biology than it is for me to move your heart, because of the way our brains are wired, and we can get into that. And the constant BS that we're pushed via social media, which is algorithmically programmed to enrage you, to keep you engaged so that it can sell more ads, and therefore literally print money. I mean, these business models print money based on feeding on our biology. And there is a war underway that's trying to hack your mind, that's trying to hack your body, and it's trying to hack your wallet. And so we need to develop that ability to be like Neo in the Matrix. And the only The only way you can do that is by walking some type of spiritual path or some type of stoic path, like basically get control over the situation.
Well, that's some very meaty topics, as I said before, and I'm excited to dive in. One of the key things that you started off with that I wanted to touch on is just this concept of finding happiness within instead of seeking it from others or from other activities or other things that maybe you think can make you happy. Really, it's within that drives that. Mm-hmm. So as you can tell, my guest today is Brett Hurt, and I mentioned some of his earlier entrepreneurial success. Three of his companies were big, badass technology companies, Coremetrics, Bazaarvoice, and data.world. But now he's gone from building companies to really influencing, as you can tell, what happens to humanity. He's got a Texas undergrad, he's a Wharton MBA, and he's written the best-selling book, as I mentioned, Love Conquers Fear, which we are absolutely going to get into. Welcome to Unlocking Moves, Brett Hurt.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Good to be here with you, brother. I can't believe we've been friends this long and in YPO together this long. I think it's been 18 years.
Yep. It's been a long time. I think I first met you at Bazaarvoice, and it's been a journey ever since, for sure. All right. So I'll usually start with your story. Tell me about your entrepreneurial background and all that. I want to get into that. But before we do, I want to talk about the fact that you've gone from really an entrepreneur who's really trying to win, who's built multiple companies, had an IPO, major exits, but now you've made a lot of money and your current work is much deeper than that. Mm-hmm. And so I want to ask you, want to understand what happened internally to drive that change. And maybe it wasn't a change, maybe it's just an evolution.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was a change and an evolution. Two things can be true at the same time. So, my background growing up here in Austin, which I'm very blessed to have grown up here, was programming since I was age 7, thanks to an amazing mom who very selflessly believed in me, and people were telling her that she was ruining me because I didn't know how to do anything else but work on that computer. And Austin was small then. It was 260,000 people when I was born. It's 2.6 million now. So
hey, before we go on, I want to touch on what you just said, because it might have gone past people who don't know the story. Mm-hmm. Your mother, when you were 7 years old, bought you an Atari computer.
That's right. Yeah.
And basically she learned to code alongside you. You coded together.
Yep, that's right. Yeah. It's amazing. And, a lot of the love that I have in my heart came from her unconditional love and honestly defending me to be able to practice my passion. And we've raised our kids the same way, like expose them to lots of things, see what they're passionate about. Once you find out what it is, let them do it without prejudice, as long as they're not like turned into a Unabomber or something like that. And so, I'm very, very lucky to have grown up here and, became successful capitalistically because I was at the right place at the right moment in human history with the right passion. And that passion turned out to lead to a lot of drive, which fortunately turned into capitalistic success. And I got all the toys I wanted. I had a Lamborghini on my wall when I was a kid. We were talking about that before we went on air and how it burned to the ground. And, I got the Lamborghini, I got the big house, I got all the things, and ultimately realized that what mattered the most that whole time was the journey, that the journey was the reward. The first book I ever wrote is Entrepreneur's Essentials, and there's a chapter in that on capture the amazing journey through photographs, because that's what you'll remember the most. That was the most popular presentation that Brant Barden, my co-founder at Bazaarvoice, and I gave as Bazaarvoice grew. We would just tell the story of Bazaarvoice through the photographs, and it was optional, but hundreds of people would attend because they wanted to see like what the early days were, and what the original moves were that got us to that place.
Hey, if you don't mind, let me stop there for a second. I want to unpack that, because you said that the journey itself was a big part of the success for you. It wasn't just the number at the end of the rainbow. Yeah. It was the journey along the way. I think most of us, and my audience is many entrepreneurs who are in the middle of the fight themselves. Yeah. And they hear that and like, whatever, I want to get the money at the end of the rainbow. But let's go a little bit deeper on that, if you don't mind, about the journey itself being the reward.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, just like anybody born in any country, you receive a certain amount of programming. And so my programming was such where I'm born into a country that picked itself up by its, bootstraps and defeated the empire of the British at that time, and, created the largest GDP per person. And so I was playing the same game as everybody else. And the journey is all about being on a mission that you consider worthy and being with people that you love to work with, that just bring out the best in you and you can bring out the best in them. And when you achieve the success that we're programmed to believe is how we're going to get happy, it feels euphoric. I set a goal when I was 25 years old. I was at Wharton getting my MBA, and I told my parents, I told a handful of friends, and of course I told my wife that I was going to found a company and take it public by the time I turned 40. And that felt very daunting. And I actually turned 40 on our IPO roadshow. I mean, you can't.
So you failed. You were late.
You can't make it up. I honestly, I tell people that. I joke around with it. I'm like, I missed it by a few days. And then, became this journey, actually, which YPO helped me with. YPO marketed this event in India where you would study this ancient Indian philosophy on the secret to happiness, and it's called Vedanta. And it came down from the Vedas, who were meditating in the Himalayas on the nature of the mind and what really makes humanity happy. And that was a huge, I grew up with some spirituality. I'm Jewish by background, but that was a huge unlock in terms of realizing the nature of the mind. The moment that you and I are in right now is called the eternal present. And there's nothing you and I can do anything about the past. So just, it's gone. And the only way we can do anything about the future is to make a decision in this moment. Maybe someone watching this makes a decision based on listening to me. It might be reading my book, or it may just be, deciding that they are now brave enough to start their own company, whatever it is. And that's the moment that we're in right now. This is the only moment that matters. And Vedanta teaches you that we spend so much of our life in worries about the past and anxieties about the future that we can miss the only moment that matters. We can create our own mind prison. And the only way to get to eternal happiness is to keep turning back to the present and noticing like all the amazing things happening. I mean, and once you live in the present, days go by slowly. And I describe myself in the Love Conquers Fear book, as you know, as a successful sleepwalker up until around the time of age 50. And that was a hard thing for me to write in my book. But it's true, because I saw the days just fly by. And I was like, what even happened today? Now my days go by very slowly. I notice beautiful acts in nature. I notice the sunrise. I live in this beautiful eternal present. And it doesn't mean that I don't spend a lot of time, with a lot of action to try to make a change in the world. It's just I live with so much gratitude and appreciation, and that's a beautiful way to live. And by the way, that's all the spiritual traditions and all the ancient philosophies were trying to teach us to do that.
That's so well said that if we can, or if I can, I'll speak for myself, I'm able to, as you said, don't worry about the past, how easy that sounds, how challenging it is, and not stress about the future or about maybe even the world around us in some ways, but just focus on what your God or my God has presented in front of you, and the beauty of nature, the connecting with the person sitting across from you. I can't tell you how frustrated I get if you get your phone out doing something while we're trying to have this conversation. Sure. It's hard to connect as a human being. Yeah. And so that's so well said, Brett.
I'll give you, one tidbit that I learned from Buddhism. And I've studied all the ancient spirituality. I'm even diving really deep in Sikhism right now, because I've looked for this common root. And that's where the title of the book came from. Love Conquers Fear is the common root that we all come from. And then there's dogma built on top of the different spiritual traditions. But one of the principles I love in Buddhism is that every day when you wake up, you're born anew. And you can decide to take anything you want forward and leave everything else in the past. And if you actually live that way, if you literally practice that, every day is like being reborn. Mm. And it's so hard for people to do that because part of our programming, based on how much scarcity we dealt with for hundreds of thousands of years, we haven't had electricity until the past 300 years. So that's 0.1% of our evolutionary time. We are trained in a way to act with consistency. And it really mattered in the past because we really were under potential death scenarios all the time, And have you ever seen that movie, The Croods? You probably watched that with your kids at one point. It's a cartoon movie where Nicolas Cage plays the older caveman and his daughter wants to get out of the cave. And she's the one that ushers in the new age of humanity. But he's just like, don't go out there. Like the saber-tooth tiger, everything's going to eat you. And it's a very good metaphor for all of humanity. Like there's very few people that will take the steps needed to actually do something as quote unquote brave as starting a company, because what can happen? You could fail. Right. Do most companies fail? Yes, they do. Does that mean you shouldn't do it? No, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. You should be one of the brave ones. And every company that you can think about working for that has a good culture, every single one started with someone brave enough to make that move.
That's very well said. And it takes sometimes a kick in the pants to make that move. Let me ask you, the question that comes to mind is, so you're now 55?
I'm 54.
54. Yeah. Would the 24-year-old Brett, what would they say if you were giving this type of counsel to him?
I mean, I think that ultimately they would be proud of me today, but they would be shocked at how transparent I am. Like the fact that my book talks about the psychedelic awakening that led to writing this book in the first place, that would feel like completely, the 34-year-old me would be horrified by that, would be like, what are you doing? Because it would assume what some of my friends assumed at the beginning of this journey. When I started my own podcast, Love Conquers Fear, I had a couple of friends pull me aside and be like, Brett, are you worried you're going to lose friends? Like you're being so authentic. Yeah. And so transparent. And I now have the data that, to my knowledge, I've lost no friends. It has massively deepened my existing friendships. I was meeting with a company CEO that we've invested in since the beginning last week. And he was like, hey, I'm not getting together with you right now to talk about the company. Company's doing great, et cetera. We talked very short bit of time about that. I'm here to talk with you about Buddhism and some of the most spiritual things that have happened in my life. And at the end of that, I told him, isn't this so amazing? We're having this conversation. The old me wouldn't have had this conversation, not because it would have been dogmatically canceling that. It would be like, let's talk about the business. Like, what's the next move in the business? And so my existing friendships have really deepened, and I have gained hundreds of new friends on this journey. I will say that the one thing that is a downside of being extremely transparent and very love forward is you have to develop a new level of discernment, because there are some people who are still locked into the fear-based mentality, and they think they want the house you have or the car you have or something like that, and that's going to make them happy. And so they will sometimes try to prey on people like me. It's pretty rare, but when it happens, I can see it coming now, because it's another form of like a control mechanism. And usually you can spot it pretty clearly. But overall, I've gained like so many amazing, authentic new friends in this journey.
I think the more I am authentic in my conversations with others, the more they're dropping their guard. And so I can see that for sure with what you're talking about. I have a similar problem of people taking advantage of me for my kindness. I haven't quite figured out, because I'm such a believer in people. I haven't quite figured out exactly how to spot from a mile away, as you said. So maybe you can give me some tips on that.
I mean, the biggest thing is to, like, there was a new age religion that kind of pursued me and tried to get me to put their leader on the podcast and my podcast and really vouch for them. And it sounded kind of intriguing at the beginning. But again, what I've been seeking is this common spiritual root, like what actually binds us together. Yeah. The fact that we're 99.9% genetically identical across this one jewel of a planet that we inhabit. And it came in the first meeting, because I was just curious, to meet with them. And it came in the first meeting where the leader of the group, you had to use their device, and they were the only ones who knew what was in the device, and the device was like super expensive. And I was like, oh, okay, so this is really about money for the leader. And then there was a fear-based mechanism in it where it's like, oh, if you don't join, that's totally fine. And like, we just kind of meet with people and see who's going to join and then move on. Just realize that Earth is in its last cycle, and all the souls that stay on Earth in this cycle, this is the last cycle, their souls won't endure at all, and only through this extension. And so it's just, there's a fear-based mechanism. And look, fear-based mechanisms exist in old religions too. Christianity has the concept of a hell where you and I can't imagine dying any more painfully than being burned alive. That was never Jesus's words, though. If you read books like the Gospels of Jesus, as translated by Stephen Mitchell, those words never came out of Jesus' mouth.
Jesus it's love and relationship with Jesus,
and oneness with God.
Yeah,
it was Paul that started to introduce those concepts. Buddhism, or not Buddhism, but Hinduism has the concept of a caste system. That's not God. That's man-made to divide us. I'm sorry, Kurt, you're in a caste that's lower than your wife's. You can't get married. So just on and on and on. So, but that doesn't mean that you should reject all of spirituality. Spirituality has a lot to teach, and through practice is amazing. It just means acting with discernment. And by the way, the same things happens with science. Science and spirituality are just two sides of the same coin. You don't reject all of science because we find out that we're wrong about something. It's 2022. I was writing about this on Sunday. I don't know if you saw it, but in 2022, there was a discovery in quantum physics related to quantum entanglement that showed that Einstein was wrong about the universe, and there is no local variable that's missing that describes why quantum entanglement is possible. So we now know that we're living in a non-local universe, meaning that it literally is all connected. And we know through CERN with Higgs boson that there is a Higgs field, but we only know what 4% of the universe is made of. We call that matter. We don't know what 96% is. We don't know what dark energy and dark matter is. And we're very landlocked on a single planet. We know now that there are at least 2 trillion galaxies. We're in the Milky Way, which is 1 billion planets. It's one galaxy. So that means our actual reality is tens of septillions of planets. So an infinite ocean, essentially, for us to explore if we don't extinct ourselves on this one planet, which it took us more than 50 years just to get back to the moon. So we're very landlocked in this infinite ocean, and we have to transcend our current mindset to usher in the age of abundance for all, which essentially is what I mean by heaven on earth. And I look at it as both metaphorical and mystical. I think we're in the prophecy times right.
Interesting. So as you can tell, we are not talking about Bazaarvoice and data.world and things like that, which we're going to get into as Unlocking Move in a bit. But I want to cover, you're already deep into it, but let's talk about Love Conquers Fear, which is a bestseller on a few of the lists right now, which is fantastic.
USA Today bestseller now.
And just congratulations on getting it done, which I know from experience
it's hard.
The easiest thing. And you're putting yourself out there in so many ways. And the fact that you're being so vulnerable and authentic about your story is
fantastic. I really don't feel vulnerable at all.
Because you're comfortable now.
Authenticity is freedom. Yeah. It really is. And there's so many things we cling on to And that is fear. That's fear of being judged. I have allowed love to conquer my fear to be able to do that. And again, the age 34-year-old me was not there.
Well, that's what the reason I asked that question is I wanted to see what the age 34, person in the audience is thinking about that. Mm-hmm. And you answered it through your own perspectives, but I think it is hard to imagine a lot of the things you're talking about if they're still slaying their own dragons, right? Mm-hmm. So that's definitely a topic I want to cover.
That's true, but let me just make one point on that. I do get criticized sometimes by people saying, well, now that you're wealthy, you can be so authentic and you can be so spiritual. And I always remind them that a lot of the most spiritual people I met around the world have very little material wealth, very, very little. And some of the places that Deborah and I have felt the most spiritual, like Bhutan, like Kenya and Tanzania, they have such a fraction of what we have from a materiality standpoint. Bhutan's entire GDP, which they don't even measure themselves on GDP, is 3 weeks of coffee in the United States. But yet they live longer than Americans. They don't suffer from the loneliness and depression epidemic that we have here. And why? Because they're practicing a different form of programming than we're receiving here. They're practicing Buddhism from the time they're born, which is all about deep inner transformation and contentment in the nature of the mind. So they're raised in a way to know how to be happy.
So they're wealthy, not materially wealthy in the way that we think of, but materially wealthy in the way that their God, their spirits have provided for them.
That's right. Their texts, what they study and the practices that they engage in.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, let's talk a little bit about the book. So you've got a central thesis that's, I think it's optimistic, but it's about this concept of the superfecta. Can you describe that and tell me a little bit about how that interacts with the world?
Yeah, sure. So we're living in a time now where, and I think we all feel it, where we're in the exponential curve. And the four biggest forces that are going to shape our future are AI, quantum computing, robotics, and brain-computer interfaces. So those four form what I call the superfecta, and they're all exponentially accelerating at the same time.
It's crazy.
And so a very simple way to think about it is AI is going to allow us to eventually produce novel science. That's how Demis Hassabis, who's in charge of everything AI at Google, describes the AGI moment. Basically, it's called the Einstein test, that if you gave an LLM or some other form of AI, LLMs are not the only game in town, if you gave it all of what humanity knew up until 1910, could it derive the general theory of relativity like Einstein did in a novel way? And he thinks we're very close, and I think we're very close. I think maybe we're a year or two away from that, if even that long. And so once you hit novel science, that creates all types of breakthroughs. Robotics is just the physical embodiment of AI. And so the same way we're having a cognitive abundance right now through intelligence, this intelligence explosion with AI, we're going to have a physical revolution where eventually you're going to be able to point to a hill and say to 100 robots, go off and build a treehouse on that hill. And it does it with scientific precision that we can't even compare to in terms of human labor. And quantum computing is going to dramatically accelerate the whole cycle because the speed at which it does things is unfathomable to a classical supercomputer, which requires ones. It uses ones and zeros, on or off, versus a qubit, which is in a quantum state, a superposition state. Okay. We can discuss what that is. And then brain-computer interfaces are going to help us really decode this quote-unquote hard problem of consciousness and figure out that our actual reality is much more spiritual and relational than we ever assumed. It's going to start out with us curing things like blindness and, the original patients now that have brain-computer interfaces are quadriplegics. And so it's very liberating, obviously. These are just input mechanisms. So if I was blind, it just means my brain is not getting the data from these input mechanisms. So those four things are all exponentially accelerating, and ultimately all technology allows us to do good or bad things with. When we discovered fire, we could have set everybody on fire, and that would have been the end of humanity. And so our core nature is genuinely mostly good, because most of what we use fire for was to cook food and warm our caves, etc. So I believe in humanity. I love humanity. But this is the ultimate test for humanity. What do we do with great, great power? With great power comes great responsibility.
So that's where my question comes in. These superfecta, as you describe, is introduced in this age of abundance, if you will. One of the things you describe is, for the greaterment of humanity. I've studied humanity a fair amount, and it's hard to imagine humanity doing it all for the utter good. So I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah. So, the way to think about it is that we have certain constructs that we've fabricated for some type of societal, quote unquote, order to make sense of things. Like time itself is an illusion. We actually know now through studying quantum physics that time itself does not exist. If people listening to this want to challenge me on that, read The Order of Time by Carlo Rovelli, he is a scientist trying to decode why gravity is a force. We actually don't understand where gravity comes from. And he's studying what's called quantum gravity. But that's a great one on Audible. I read my own book on Audible, which was really hard, the hardest public speaking job ever.
Yes, I want to talk about that too.
Benedict Cumberbatch is the one that read The Order of Time.
Okay.
So it's like as smooth as silk. He's plays that role perfectly. And so, through really thinking about how these constructs are going to break, if we were able to capture, I'm just looking outside, at the sky, if we were able to capture 1 hour of the sun's energy through a material science breakthrough, less than an hour actually, it would power the world's energy needs for over a year. 1 day, 1 hour. Not every day, 1 hour. Just 1 day, 1 hour. So think about what we could do with unlimited energy. We could create weapons with unlimited energy, or we could feed everybody on the planet. We could desalinate everywhere. We could run robots 24/7 to go build all the clean water, pipelining, the healthcare infrastructure, the roads, et cetera, that a country like Chad needs. I personify Chad in the book, as you know, and only 1 in 8 people in 2026 in the country of Chad, a country of 21 million people, have electricity, 1 in 8. And the type of suffering they have, we can't really imagine as Americans. I know we have suffering in our country, and there are plenty of places in America that we've destroyed through the opioid crisis and are needed to be rebuilt. But you have to put yourself in a place of what will humanity demand once the 60 Minutes or whatever your favorite news program is comes out with the story. It's probably going to be someone like Demis again. He won the Nobel Prize in chemistry for Google's release of AlphaFold, which decoded how proteins fold, which will create an unlimited amount of medicines that allow us to target all types of disease. We're probably going to solve disease in the next 15 years. So what's the 60 Minutes that shows, hey, we just had the material science breakthrough where we now are going to have unlimited energy and the sun's going to last another 1 billion years, and we've only been here for 300,000 years. What will humanity demand? And don't underestimate how humanity can demand things and move a country and a world. It took one person in India, Gandhi, to say there's a different way. And the masses in India told the British, no more. We're not going to allow you to rule over us. And they did it through nonviolence. It took one man in South Africa, Nelson Mandela, to change the entire nation. And so you're going to have these constructs which keep us fighting just break so fundamentally in that type of world. If you believe in the goodness of humanity. And there are plenty of reasons to douse on us. And, I'm Jewish. There was the Holocaust. There's all types of horrible things that have happened. But ultimately, it's whether or not you bet that humanity will demand to create a world based on love. As Pope Leo said in his first encyclical, which came out actually the first week I ever gave a speech on the book. I was giving a speech on Wednesday. On Monday is when the encyclical came out, and it's on the magnificence of humanity. And chapter 5 of that 40,000 word encyclical was on building the civilization of love in the age of AI. It's got perfect synchronicity with love conquers fear. Wow. So you're seeing the Pope come out. You're seeing the model leaders, like Demis Hassabis, Mustafa Suleyman, Dario Amodei. All of them basically are unified in these messages. The president of China came out 2 weeks ago and said, we have to unify around AI. And you're having more and more people wake up to say, we've got to meet this moment. And we meet this moment, we create heaven on earth.
Wow, that's beautiful. Today's episode is brought to you by Chinook Seedery, the best sunflower seeds ever. Available online at chinookseedery.com and Amazon, or wherever you get your seeds, including Buc-ee's, Dick's Sporting Goods, Shields, Love's Travel Stops, Circle K, and thousands of other locations around the country. I wanted to joke that you must have plagiarized Pope Leo's deal if you he just came out 2 days later. But didn't feel appropriate. So, thank you for that.
You know what? He wouldn't care. He'd be like, yes, let's get the message out.
Perfect. Hey, do you want to cover any of the, just walk through some of the major premises? There's a couple of things that stood out for me. We could talk a little bit about the lattice and about we've already talked about the mindset. I want to go through some of your part 2 is application, where you cover some of society's biggest problems.
Yeah, sure.
Let me cover that actually, because the things you listed there, geopolitics, climate change, nuclear weapons and warfare, objectification of women, capitalism, and religion. Yeah. The one that jumped out at me was the objectification, say that 10 times really fast, of women, and why that was the one that really stood out for you, or stood out for me amongst all the other ones. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I was really struggling with why did it take so long for America to give women the right to vote? It happened a little bit over 100 years ago. And then there was an asterisk on it because women of color, that wasn't until another 50 years later. In Switzerland, women did not have the right to vote until 1972. Wow. In Switzerland. And so I was grappling with that, and it hit me where the great othering of half of humanity, half of us are female, has led to us punching down on others. As a Jew, I always think about why does anti-Semitism exist, et cetera. But the punching down on Black Americans, punching down on Jewish, people, on Muslims, et cetera, it all comes from that root of objectifying and dominating over half of humanity. And it really crystallized in that. And we have to transcend that. We have to realize where we came from, not to feel guilty. We need to forgive ourselves for the past completely, but to transcend and realize that we are one humanity. We're 99.9% the same. And we should always treat people the way we ourselves want to be treated, right? It's the golden rule. And we just don't do that always, and women in our country today really are still under a patriarchy. And you can see it because just go look at corporate boardrooms and how many women are there. Go look at where BCs write checks and how many of those are female CEOs. Now, it doesn't mean we haven't had a lot of progress. The one thing I talk about in that chapter is that now young men are being left behind. You probably didn't see that coming when you started that chapter. But it's true. Our daughter Rachel's biggest complaint when she started to go to Tulane University, which she loves, she's a rising senior now, is that 63% of the student body is female. That's actually pretty common at top schools right now. Why is that happening? Well, young men now are captured by pornography and all these other things where they literally are wasting their time. And we've had this rise of like really focusing education on lifting up women, which is great, but both sexes need to come up at the same time. We need to also realize how to raise young men. And one of the things missing right now societally, I was at this dinner recently, which was a deep discussion on liberty and capitalism. It was mostly a libertarian type of crowd. And we were discussing lots of things. It was a great discussion. And the CEO of Liberty Ventures, one of my very good friends, Alexander McCoben, who was on episode 19 of my podcast, we started to, he asked me, Brett, do you think we've missed anything in this discussion? I said, yeah, I really do. I think we have. We didn't talk about values at all. And I talked about how Charlie Munger would recommend to 34-year-old men and women, find a mentor that you can emulate. Doesn't mean you need to know them, and emulate everything about them, including their values, but be careful of who you pick. And there's a lot of people now picking people that have like absurd amounts of wealth, but values wise, you want to model after them. And the person I picked Warren Buffett. And Warren Buffett, for me, is the embodiment of love. And part of the reason I picked him is that he bought one of my friend's companies. At one point, this amazing human being named Sam Taylor is actually on Undercover Boss during the days where that was a TV show. And he was one of the first, and he was the CEO of Oriental Trading. And I've been to the Berkshire Hathaway shareholders meeting quite a few times. And I was there, and we were in a breakout of 50 CEOs learning what it's like to work with Warren Buffett. And this is after me seeing Warren Buffett like move around, shake everybody's hand at all the companies that are represented there that are owned by Berkshire Hathaway, and how much love. He looks like a dolphin playing in water. And I asked Sam, I said, what was it like to go from private equity ownership to being owned by Warren Buffett? And he started crying in front of 50 CEOs. And I was raised as a boy that you don't really cry like that. So I was like, oh my gosh, what on earth have I done? I was so distraught. And he choked back the tears. I'm like tearing up just telling you this. And he said, I want you to know under private equity ownership that nobody cared about me or anybody in the company. We were just numbers on a spreadsheet. Nobody gave a shit about us. He said, once Warren Buffett bought the company, he went to every single person in the company. He shook their hand. He looked at them in the eyes. He said he loves them. He loves the company. He's so happy that I'm the CEO. And he said the amount of rocket fuel that gave me to manifest love in the company was unprecedented. He said it was like an absolute transformation. And that is the type of person you want to emulate. And so I talked about that at that dinner, because I said, I want to be more like Warren Buffett from a can I manifest as much love perspective. I don't care if I have, the 100 billion or whatever he has. Like, I look up to him because he manifests love. And I could tell you so many Warren Buffett stories. I've studied so much about him at this point, but it's just, that personal story like meant so much to me, because I was on the board of shop.org with Sam. He was one of my best friends. I talk about him in past tense because he passed away from brain cancer. He's such a great guy. He was Sam was like just absolute life of the party. He was so much fun and so sweet and such a great husband and father to his daughters. And so that I look up to Warren Buffett because of that, not because of what kind of material. He lives in the same house. Like, he's been there for 50 years. I mean, it's embarrassing to me when I visited his house. I was like, oh my gosh, I've got a nicer house than Warren Buffett. Like, something's really wrong with that,
Man, I love that. That's special. It talks about him as a human being as opposed to just a money manager or whatever. I appreciate that.
Exactly.
I want to cover, the name of the show is Unlocking Moves. And the premise is like, what are the key things that really changed your trajectory?
Sure.
And as I said before, I want to highlight things so that future entrepreneurs or people who listen to the podcast can see what can recognize those opportunities as they come about.
Yeah.
What would be an unlocking move or two for you?
Well, There's a lot. I mean, one I should probably talk about just to finish the thread with that is the biggest transformation I had later in my life was a psychedelic journey, and I tell that in chapter 13 of my book. And essentially, I was, and I describe myself in chapter 13 as being a successful sleepwalker for most of my life, which was very hard to write. But basically, I had a friend, a very good friend. He's still a very good friend, who I call Xavier in the book. That's not his actual name. I say that in the book too, because he's not ready to go public yet with this. But I basically was having these conversations with him, and he's like, I had this journey, and I'm having a conversation with your soul. I was like, oh my gosh, what are you talking about? And he kept on sending me transcripts of what I was saying in the journey. And it really sounded like this higher version of me that I was like, well, I would like to meet that person, but I don't know if I would do a psychedelic journey. And so I started to talk with Deborah about it. And eventually, after 2 years, got comfortable with what I really have to lose. Like,
so just to be clear, this was his journey.
This was his journey.
He was talking to you in his journey.
Yes,
and
to my soul.
Okay,
yeah.
All right.
So it sounded like really bizarre to me at the time. And the first journey I did was at age 50, and it was unbelievable.
Was it psilocybin or what was it?
It's not important what it was, and I'd rather not disclose that because I've read enough books at this point on psychedelics. Like for example, I can tell you I've never done ayahuasca, but I've read enough. I've read 3 books on ayahuasca that I've read about journeys that are the same type of journey I had. But basically, the first soul that I encountered was my mom, and I lost my mom 14 years ago, and she showed me what it was like to raise me since I was born, like how much selflessness, like I experienced her holding me in her arms, the whole thing. And then the second soul is she took me to my wife's soul and showed me I'd married the best parts of her, but that I was healing through Deborah, something I always wanted for my mom. My mom was Brenda Laurel Hurt. And I always wanted my mom to do something for herself, just something like go take a vacation on your own, like go get a massage, do something. She wouldn't do anything. It was all just selfless service to me and my sister Brandy. And it was amazing that she was that loving, but she showed me that I was healing with Deborah, something I wanted for her. When we became financially successful, I told Deborah about 20 years ago, I'm like, you're free. She's like, what do you mean? I'm like, you can go on any vacation you want. I'll be with you on some of them. But you should ultimately enjoy this. We're not taking any of this with us. And she started to take trips, and now she's been to countries all over the world, and she's got an amazing life. And, we have an amazing relationship, and I go with her on a number of these trips, but there's a lot where she goes with new friends she's made. The third soul I encountered was my best friend growing up, who was begging me to reach out, and I could feel it was urgent. And I connected with him the next day. We hadn't talked for 10 years. We got back together. We became good friends. And he called me about a year ago, and he said, hey, when you reached out to me 3 years ago, I want you to know that it was really weird for me because I felt like God had answered my prayers. And I said, well, what were you doing the day before? He said, I was in deep prayer. I was begging you to reach out. I said, brother, you're not going to believe what I was doing.
Begging you specifically?
And I could feel it in the journey. And so and there are lots of other things that happened, but it started this ability to basically see my life and realize the programs that were running in it, and also realize that our actual reality is like so much more weird than we would think. In a material world, we're taught to think that consciousness just magically pops out of the brain in a dead ocean of a universe, which is near absolute cold. It's 2.725 degrees Kelvin in space, which 0 Kelvin is absolute cold. and that, we're just in this dead, lifeless place, and we're just a cosmic miracle, some accident. And we know that the one thing that we have is we're conscious. We know that. Like, we can feel it, you can meditate, you can experience what it's like to remember, so many amazing, beautiful memories throughout your life. So many, you can touch the divine in a meditation. And so I want to be really clear on this, that for me, that was a big awakening. And it was the Love Conquers Fear journey that led to this book. And I described that journey in chapter 13, actually quote from the transcript of it, where I was having a conversation with my soul and a conversation with God, whatever you think God is. And it led to the directive that I needed to share this with humanity, and I needed to help humanity. I need to be part of the awakening for humanity. And there's lots of people that are part of the awakening that are doing their own part. And that would help us get to this place where we can manifest heaven on earth. And so now we're actually in this very interesting time where the study of consciousness is not so dogmatically canceled. You would have been laughed out of academics even 10 years ago if you said, I want to study consciousness. I'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, there's nothing to see here. And it's the only thing that matters. It's the most important thing that matters. And so if someone's listening to this and they're like, oh, well, maybe I should do psychedelics, what I would tell you is, like, be super duper careful. Go check a lot of references. And there are many other paths. Like, I'm not attached to a psychedelic path. I'm just going to be honest with people that was helpful to me. But other paths, like, I have lots and lots of friends who have never done psychedelics who are amazing at meditating. I do meditate every day. I think that's an incredible practice. I have friends that have had a spontaneous spiritual awakening. I have friends that don't believe in God, but study Stoicism, that have a great life, have really good mastery of their mind. And then I've had what I didn't know prior to this journey. I have now 13 friends who have had near-death experiences where they've seen beyond the veil, they've touched whatever heaven is, and come back to tell the tale. And one thing that's sad to me, I'm not sad like I wallow in this sadness, but it's sad that this was the situation, is that prior to 2025, prior to doing my podcast, etc., out of friendships that I've had for 10, 20 years, 0 friends had told me their near-death experience story. I've now had 13 tell me.
So friends you've had for a while.
Friends I've had for a while.
Oh, wow.
And so I thought, well, wow, I guess I really wasn't projecting any openness to that. And probably when they were telling people that, it's, that Homer Simpson meme where he, like, backs into the bushes and he disappears. They probably experienced that. They probably experienced people being like, wow, you're like super woo, super crazy. But for them, it was completely and totally real, and how beautiful is it that our actual reality is one where spirituality and science can be true.
I think that's really good for people to hear. And I don't think everybody can quite understand it just yet, but I'm glad you're sharing that. I've had a couple of experiences myself. I've did a psychedelic journey to uncover some things for myself about a year ago.
Great.
And it was very impactful. There's for those of you out there interested, there's a Netflix series out there called How to Change Your Mind.
Yeah, amazing.
It's actually driven by, I believe, a New York Times journalist that uncovered
Michael Pollan.
Psychedelics 30 or 40 years ago, and his journey about uncovering how valuable they can be for things like PTSD or whatever. And then separately, there's another method out there. It's I think it's called holotropic breathing or breath work.
Yeah, holotropic breath work. Yep.
And I've done some of that myself as well. And it's really fascinating how the types of things you can uncover doing that. I personally believe much better than a lot of therapies with a licensed therapist or whatever.
Yeah, if you take antidepressants, they work less than 20% of the time, and you have to take them forever.
And who knows what they're doing to you otherwise,
yeah.
Right?
And one cause, like, we've been proudly supporting is Americans for Ibogaine. I've never done a big Ibogaine journey. I don't have that type of suffering that would require it. But Ibogaine is the first place I would recommend to a vet that's suicidal. It's literally the first place I'd recommend. And you have to go, sadly, to Mexico to do it because it's not legal. It's not legal in the United States. But it'll break them out of that over 80% of the time with one dose. And this is what Governor Perry is now dedicated his life to, alongside Brian Hubbard, who is the CEO of Americans for Ibogaine. And that's what led to President Trump fast tracking psychedelic assisted therapy research and the legalization, hopefully, of some of these under, careful supervision. The other thing about psychedelics, like I put out an episode on my podcast, it's episode 66 on decoding psychedelics, and I clip from past episodes, is it's all about the integration. So like the journey you had, it's not just about the journey you had, it's whether or not you actually did anything with it. Because you're going to a sacred place, at least that's my opinion on it. And you're coming back to transform something and so for me, the integration is like 60 to 70% of the benefit. And I spend a lot of time on the integration. So it's a lot of hard work.
I can see that. And the integration goes on for months.
Yeah,
if
exactly.
done properly. We're running out of time, which is sad because there's some fascinating topics. I do have a couple of, or at least one more question I want to ask.
Sure.
And that is, I consider myself the listener's advocate. And if I've listened to this podcast and I've got Kurt, with Brett, what would I want Kurt to ask? There's a lot of things around what you just said. I honestly want to dive deeper into, but one of the question I prepared was because a lot of our audience is entrepreneurs, and you and Deborah have invested in over 150 entrepreneurs and about 50 VC funds we talked about earlier. What are the attributes of an entrepreneur that you're like within 10 minutes you can determine, I really think I want to potentially invest in this person, or no flipping way?
Yeah. So the number one thing you develop if you see thousands of pitches like I have, is you develop this form of pattern recognition where you can tell if someone's really in it 100% or not. And one of the ways I describe it is, imagine have a back-to-back pitch for the exact same business. And one CEO walks in and they're kind of like very reserved and like, Kurt, like, I think we'll do maybe 10 million revenue in the next couple of years, and then maybe grow that by 20%. And, this is probably the last money we'll raise because we'll just be profitable from that point on. And, I really don't want to work with VCs and, but, it is a big market. It's $1 billion market, and et cetera, et cetera. The other walks in and is like, this is $1 billion market where you're going to do 10 million, but that's going to grow to 30 million in the next year. I am absolutely in this to transform the industry. Here's the people, et cetera, with me. Who are you going to back?
Yeah. The passion.
And so you want someone who acts like they have the cure for cancer, and they can't fake that. Like, you can see through if someone's trying to fake that just by asking probing questions. Another thing is, they say, I'm raising 10 million. I say, well, exactly how are you going to allocate that? And the best will just know that answer. They don't even need to look at a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
They'll be like, well, I'm doing, 2 million for marketing. Here's the top marketing. So they know the whole plan.
Yeah.
They've internalized it.
Know the business. I love it. All right. Well, last question is the trick question. What is one question you're never asked, and either you wish they would ask or you're secretly glad that they don't?
Gosh, I'm so transparent these days. I don't really mind any question. I guess the biggest thing is that I always have to make the point that you can never, you don't have to wait until you're successful to start to heal yourself. I really think that people, it's interesting. Like, the reason I can talk to people and they'll listen now is because I've achieved a lot of success. But John Mackey told me this one time. John's the founder of Whole Foods and is on the cover of the book, and it's one of my best friends. He said he would come into Whole Foods some days and have this mantra of, every single person that I encounter, including customers, has something beautiful to teach me. And he said, and if you approach life that way, every single person you encounter will have something to teach you. So I think, having that ability to realize you don't have to wait. There's not once I get the Lamborghini on my, childhood wall, then I can start becoming, and there's so much programming to say, like, when I graduated from Wharton, another way to tell this story is there were a lot of people that I graduated with who said, I wish I was doing what you're doing now. And I said, well, why don't you do it? And what I was doing then was I was taking no salary and starting my own company. And they said, well, I'm going to make a couple of $1 million doing this investment banking thing, and then I'll do what you're doing, because then I'll have the money to do it as a safety net. And I graduated from Wharton over 25 years ago. You know how many of those people ultimately started a business? Almost none, right? It was very, very small number, because if you're doing a job that you hate to do only for the money, you will reward yourself in some ways. And you know how you're going to reward yourself? You're going to reward yourself like the game says to reward yourself. You're going to get the big house, you're going to get the nice car, etc. And then you're going to be chained down, literally chained down by your materiality, and lose your ability to be agile. One of the things I learned in India studying Vedanta is that you will always feel rich if you live within your means, no matter how much money you make.
I want people to hear that. I talk to a lot of people. I've got 3 boys who are 26, 23, and 20, almost 20 now. And so I have a lot of conversations with their friends who are just graduating college. What should I do? Can you help me find a job? And one of the biggest things I encourage them to do is try to find something that they are passionate about, or take that risk and be an entrepreneur. And I try to encourage them, if you go for the money, at some point you're going to wake up and you're going to hate your life.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Whether you're 30, 40, 50, whatever. And it's so hard to get out of that, right? Because you've got a mortgage, you've got the cars, you've got the vacation home, and there's that status you just can't, it's almost impossible to walk away from. That's or right. Pay for the things if you go and try something on your own later. So just be careful. I love that advice, Brett.
Good. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, when you're young, it is true. You have really nothing to lose except for your ego, because you have no material attachments. I mean, when Deborah and I got married, we had no kids. It took us more than 8 years to have kids. And part of that was my fear of being worthy enough financially to have kids. If I could go back in time, I have lots and lots of regrets in life. I think it's total bullshit when people say they have no regrets. And if I could go back, I would have had kids earlier. I would have just believed in myself more instead of waiting until I already knew I was going to be financially successful to start having kids.
Wow. Life of no regret. Love conquers fear. Some great stuff. Hey, Brett, on that note, let's wrap this puppy up.
All right.
It's been great having you on Unlocking Moves. I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks for what you're doing.
Everybody out there to please go like and subscribe wherever you consume your podcast, and give us a 5-star review. And Brett, again,
and one thing too, if you're interested in the book, loveconquersfear.org has everything about the book, the podcast, and all of that.
I love it. And it's not just a book, guys. This is, as you can tell, it is a calling, and it's very powerful stuff. Brett, thanks so much, man.
All right. Thanks, buddy.
If you're an entrepreneur and you think you might have outgrown a member of your team, or maybe you've got a mic, as we talked about in Who's Your Mic, check out this quiz at who'syourmic.com/quiz. That's who'syourmic.com/quiz.